Hey, geographers, welcome back to our conversation about population and how it relates to human geography. These might not match the backdrop today, but they were clipped right before the frost because it got cold tonight. So, how nice. Today, we're going to focus on the consequences of population. So, how does population have affect all sorts of different things? So, this was just queued up incorrectly. Here we go. Consequences of population distribution. So, first, let's pause a second and always look back to the big picture and think about what are we studying and why are we studying it. Now, think of a geographer. So, why is a geographer studying population, right? So, geographers study where population is distributed. So, if there's a high population here, where is it? Where is there a low population? And then what are the things that connect to that? So if there's a lot of people somewhere, why are they there? What are they doing there? What is the rate that the population is either increasing or decreasing? Because that matters. So geographers have a lot of questions and they try to figure out some of the whys behind them. So a different type of geographer is, if you want to be specific, is a demographer. Think of demographics, right? So they study specifics based on that population. So maybe the population's age, their race, their health, their gender, their fertility, their occupation, right? All sorts of things like that. And they also study the political, economic, and social consequences of the population being what it is, and especially in connection to those demographics. So, if there is a lot of healthy people or a lot of unhealthy people in a population, what could be some of not only the causes, but the consequences of that, right? Why are there certain jobs clustered in some parts of the globe or country or even state as opposed to others? If you Google a demographer, this is what I saw, and I thought it was funny because I don't think most of them just sit behind a map like that all day. All right, so it may seem obvious that the population is not distributed evenly throughout the world. Look at this dot population dot density map, right? It's some connections there for you. There's three main global clusters in the world, and there's also a fourth one we'll discuss. So, where are these clusters? There's a European cluster of the population. There's a Southeast Asia cluster of the population, so like India and the surrounding area. And there's also an East Asia cluster of the population. So think like Eastern China. The fourth major cluster is the Northeast, right where we are, right? So that's also considered a major global cluster. That's not to say that there aren't any other clusters in the world, right? Parts of Mexico and South America are heavily populated. But when you think of like overall, like global themes, big clusters, those are the four that you'll tend to focus on. So just if you zoom in on the United States, you'll see where we are. We often mention that New Jersey is the most populated state in the country, but if you extend it to like the New York City area, you'll see why it's so red there. So, like we said, these clusters are where there's this high density. And can we explain the phenomena of where are the clusters and why are they there? What caused there to be a significant population there? Often that might take you to study history. So, think of ancient China, think of Mongolia, think of wars and all sorts of things. But also, you might want to think of agriculture. Is it a fertile area that could support a large population in these areas? Things like that. New Jersey was once called the Garden State. Actually, it still is, right? So think of all these characteristics, all these factors that explain why a cluster is where it is. Now, a geographer is also going to think of questions that relate to where these clusters are. And even if it's not one of these major clusters, but even just any area where you see a shift in population. So let's think of some of the political questions a geographer is going to ask. Is the political system equipped to handle a growing or a shrinking population, right? Whether it's a monarchy, whether it's a democratic republic, whether it's a communist country, right? Whatever it is, right? And with whoever's in charge and the way things run, if the population increases, can it handle it? If the population goes down, can that government respond? How are the needs of the people represented in government? Does the government care about the needs of the people and do they address them? And how are they sort of legally or what are their accepted ways of responding? And sometimes the ways maybe aren't even legitimate ways that they respond. Also, what strain does the people place on the government to provide for its public needs? Are they allowed to protest? Can they call up a congressman? What can they do in their situation if they think there's a need to make sure that it gets addressed? So, just one example, we mentioned that the Northeast has a high population. So, with a growing population, it's going to need an evolving infrastructure to support that. So, the president, it says here, flush with Biden's infrastructure cash, New York is choosing highways over public transit. So, for example, if New York State has some money, whether it's from a block grant or some sort of grant from the federal government, is it going to use it to address that population? Well, a growing population and will need infrastructure updates. It will need to have evolving transportation. So, is highways, the way to put that cash instead of like new railways or things like that, right? So people can discuss, debate, report in newspapers. Is this the right way to be doing it? With a growing population, a population cluster, also think of the economic impacts that is going to face, to put on the area. So if the population goes up, are there enough jobs for the working age people? Because if there's not, what does that mean? Is the government going to foot the bill for these people? Are they just going to be out on the streets? Is it going to be a little bit of both? Are there going to be charities to help support them? Are they going to be likely to move someplace else? Right? What are the options? So, and then on the flip side, are there enough people to fill available jobs? If you need certain workers just to have society rolling and there's no one to fill those roles, that could be a problem. Imagine you don't have enough uh, doctors and nurses, if you don't have enough police officers, if you don't have enough teachers, if you don't have enough maintenance workers at the grocery store, right? So here's an example of just an unemployment rate in New Jersey. And, even though we're in the Northeast, if you look at the US rate down below, you see it really hasn't been much different. So if it was, that might be an area of concern. There's also social impacts of these populations. Just think about what you learned back as a freshman in world history, that with the Industrial Revolution, there was this lag in society. And as people moved into the cities, there wasn't enough resources there right away, right? There weren't enough hospitals, schools, places for them to live. And that's how you get like the crowded tenement buildings, the polluted rivers, organized crime taking over with a lack of law enforcement, all things like that. So, are there enough hospitals? Are there enough schools? What about an aging population? If you have an aging population, do you have pensions, for example, to take care of them? Other ways to take care of their healthcare needs? Facilities for aging people, whether it's a nursing home or assisted living or something like that. So here's some more local examples for you guys. New Jersey has one of the highest ratios of people to hospitals in the country. I mean, it is by state the largest. So for every hospital, there's over 49,000 people, right? So there are some of the best hospitals in this area, but the number of people at the hospital is very, very high. Or if you're in like South Dakota or something, Maybe you're going to travel a lot further to get to a hospital, but there's more hospitals per people. But if you think about it, it sort of makes sense if the population is so low and you need one like every so often. The United States, just so you get an idea, the overall average is just 23,000 people per hospital. So we're like, over double that. New Jersey is has one school for every 560 people. Right, to just give you an idea of like things that need to be kept in mind. To the left is a newspaper headline from just earlier this month, October 1st of 2024, that talks about a possible nurses strike that was bound to happen or could have happened in New Jersey. So think about this: if we have that, so many people per hospital, when you go to a hospital, there's a good chance that it's crowded. You may have to wait in the ER. Like, oh, like why is it going to take so long to schedule out a surgery? So think if you're working in these places, right? If you're working as a nurse with the revolving door of patients constantly in, you may be overworked. You might not have enough people to even fill those jobs. So there's different needs that are going to need to be met for people that work in these conditions. So geographers will also study the relationship between people and the Earth's resources. So, what are the resources? Whether it's soil and the ground to fertilize crops, water and irrigation. Think of all the natural resources, um, coal, natural gas. Think of trees, right? All sorts of things like that. So, what are the environmental consequences of population? So once again, think back to what you learned about the Industrial Revolution, its early days in Britain, and I'm sure you learned about like all the smog that was in the air, uh, about the rivers that were full with pollution and all those sorts of things. So that doesn't mean that everywhere that a population is increasing, it's going to be this detrimental, right? But it does reflect that it's going to tax the resources, right? There used to be forests all over England, but the population used it. That resource is available now. There was a large coal resource, and that's why you see lots of coal burning factories there at the time. So, even not too far away in the Passaic River here, right, you see just the pollution that's going to affect. So, you might be draining the resources, right, like just using all of it. You could also be contaminating your resources. You could also be doing a little bit of both. And of course, there are ways to try to manage, preserve it, sustain it. But if you don't, right, these are things that can happen. Here's just an example of the main coal areas in the United States, right? So um, as the population increases throughout the country, right, there's going to be other parts of that country that might need to use their resources to support them, right? So what's the impact of people on the environment and resources as well, right? So what do people do to the environment just by living, breathing, and doing what they do, commuting to work? Um, Having Amazon deliver your things, right? So here's just some examples. We see two maps. You would say it's a local scale, but you could also say it's a national scale. It's of the United States, but you see local states to the left. You see counties to the right. They are both chloropleth maps that the shading indicates whatever it is that the geographer wants you to understand. The left are the states with the highest water consumption. So we have the highest water consumption in California. I believe a big part of that is because of the almond industry. You also have Texas. Could that be the cattle industry? That'd be interesting to see why it's so high in Texas. And it's interesting to see that New Jersey is amongst some of the lower ones. Maybe that's just because we learned to shut off the water when we brush our teeth. That could be why. The one on the right is the by county, right? So more specific. And remember, as you get smaller, you're going to get more accurate. The county annual consumption of gasoline in gallons per year. So notice there's some states where it's not much. There are also states that aren't really populated. There's not a huge population in Alaska, right? So they use less than 5 million gallons of gasoline per year. But holy cow, our part of New Jersey, there's a significant amount. Is it because we're doing a lot of driving? Is it because of heat? Probably a lot of it is driving. Do you really need to go out during lunch every day? You probably don't. Can you probably go to town sometimes instead of where you're going some other days? You probably could, right? All right, so this is serious, people. Sometimes the consequences are ones we don't even think of. Sometimes the consequences have to do with things like Cheetos. I don't even know how these get in my house. I do not buy these things. These are gross, right? My daughter's saying, throw these out.
Oh, they're delicious.
No, they're disgusting. Right? These are anything that glows in the dark means you shouldn't eat it. And it also means that you should not drop it or leave it behind in a cave. Because this just happened very recently. So some Turon, that's what they call them, moron tourists, right? Left behind this unopened bag of Cheetos in a cave in a national park. And they had to take serious consequences to do about this. Because if you read here, listen, read this, will you? The process, right? Process. This is not even natural. This is garbage.
It's not like health class. It's history. Let them live. Eat the
They can
Cheetos.
learn about. They're going to learn not to eat Cheetos. The
They're still gonna
processed
eat them 'cause
corn,
they're good.
softened by the humidity of the cave, formed the perfect environment to host microbial life and fungi. Cave crickets, mites, spiders, and flies soon organize into a temporary food web, dispersing the nutrients of the surrounding cave and formations. Mold spread higher up the nearby surfaces, fruit die and stink, and the cycle continues. So basically, this one bag of Cheetos could mess up the entire ecosystem in these caves. And
so that's why you gotta eat it so it doesn't.
No, you don't eat this. Before the video, she was saying they're gross, so don't listen. All right, so it says
it's a flaming hot.
here it says the park says eating and drinking anything other than plain water attracts animals into the cavern. Look at all the different bats that live there. You don't want to mess with the bats, right? The park ranger said 20 minutes were spent removing mold and foreign debris from surfaces inside the cave just from this bag of Cheetos, right? It did. So this one bag reached all this havoc. So, right, not only do you want to think about like, turning off the water and how much are you driving and all that stuff, but what unnatural things are you leaving behind that can have a detrimental consequence to the environment? All right. You definitely do not want to put a giant Cheeto puff in a cave because look what a little bag did. You do this, this could probably ruin the whole world, really, right? So you don't want to do that. If you fast forward to that part, go back and read it because you need to learn about that stuff, right? So, final part of this here. You want to know also the relationship between the population and resources. And there's basically three ways that could happen. So imagine that the blue, what is that, teal, sky blue, whatever you want to call that, those circles represent population. All right. The red circles, they represent resources. Right. Now, one is not necessarily better than the other because it can change. But at times, one will be better than the other. So if you have more resources than population, which is the first one, right? Then people are living below carrying capacity. Remember that vocab word, right? How much what is the capacity of what kind of population you can carry, right? If you have an even amount of population to resources, like you have just enough of what you need for people, then you're at carrying capacity. If you have more people than you have Reese's for them, very rarely is that good. That is over carrying capacity. That's sort of like when we, are we at over carrying capacity in some areas now? I would argue so, right? So keep in mind that the carrying capacity can be different in the same area over time. For example, farming techniques can evolve. And with that, you might not need as many resources, right? Or you might not need as many people as that happens. So keep in mind that the carrying capacity is not a static number in any area. All right. Before you go, you should review some of the things that we already talked about. So things when you think of population density, think of agricultural density, like how many farmers per area. Think of arithmetic density, physiological density, because that all does relate to carrying capacity, right? How many farmers do you need to be at capacity, to be below capacity, so on and so forth. All right. Don't eat Cheetos.